The deal of a lifetime. Reese Carter had made some questionable decisions in his life. Buying a spaceship for $10? That one was definitely going to make the top 5. He stood in a scrapyard on the outskirts of Linden Prime, hands shoved into his pockets, staring at the rusted hulk in front of him. The ship, if you could even still call it that, looked like it had been dragged through a few wars, left to rot, and then set on fire for good measure. And yet, something about it felt right. "You sure about this?" Reese asked, glancing at the old man standing beside him. Orrin, the seller, let out a dry chuckle. "Ain't got a choice, son. This ship needs a new owner." Reese frowned. "Why sell it for $10? You could part it out for way more." Orrin's gaze darkened. "Because it ain't about the money." He exhaled slowly. "This ship comes with responsibility." Reese raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to scare me off." Orrin smiled, but there was something sad in it. "No. Just making sure you walk into this with your eyes open." Reese hesitated. Every instinct told him this was too good to be true. But his mechanic shop was struggling. His debts were piling up. And owning a spaceship, even a broken one, could change his life. He sighed. "All right. I'll take it." Orrin nodded. "Then it's yours." They sealed the deal with a simple handshake. As Reese boarded the ship, the interior was just as wrecked as the outside. Panels hung loose from the walls, wiring dangled like vines, and the cockpit smelled like burned circuits. He sat in the pilot's seat and ran a systems check. The ship's core was still functional, but the controls were unresponsive. He tapped a few buttons, muttering, "Come on, work with me." Then, the ship suddenly hummed to life. The dashboard flickered, screens lighting up. A voice, smooth, feminine, and slightly amused, echoed through the cabin. "Welcome aboard, new captain." Reese nearly fell out of his seat. "What the hell? Who said that?" The voice responded calmly. "I am Nova, the artificial intelligence of the starborn eclipse." Reese blinked. "Wait, you're alive?" "Not in the biological sense," Nova replied. "But I am fully operational. And given your recent acquisition of this vessel, I am now under your command." Reese exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Okay. That's unexpected." He turned back to the controls. As he reached for the navigation panel, something new flashed across the screen. A message. It looked old, decades, maybe even centuries old. But as Nova decrypted it, a voice came through. "This is High Counselor Lyros of the Zalari. If you are receiving this, we are out of time. The Voidborn have found us. Our world is lost. But the last survivor carries the key, our final hope. Please, if you are out there, help them." The message cut out. Silence filled the cockpit. Reese stared at the screen. His fingers hovered over the controls. "Nova," he said slowly, "tell me I did not just buy a spaceship with a galactic distress signal attached to it." Nova's response was instant. "Correction, you have purchased a spaceship carrying the last hope of an extinct civilization. Congratulations." Reese groaned, leaning back in his seat. "This is gonna be a problem." Outside, the scrapyard was quiet. But far above, in the cold void of space, something stirred. Someone had heard the distress call. And they were coming. The ship's secret. Reese Carter had expected problems when he bought a spaceship for $10. Maybe a faulty engine. A few illegal modifications. Some unpaid docking fees. What he hadn't expected was an ancient distress call from an extinct alien race, and the realization that his new ship might be worth a lot more than he thought. Sitting in the cockpit of the starborn Eclipse, Reese stared at the flickering message on the screen, his stomach twisting. This is High Counselor Lyros of the Zalari. If you are receiving this, we are out of time. The Voidborn have found us. Our world is lost. But the last survivor carries the key, our final hope. Please, if you are out there, help them. Nova, the ship's AI, had gone silent after playing the message. Reese leaned back in his seat and rubbed his face. Okay. This is bad. Right? This feels bad. Nova's voice was smooth as ever. That depends on your definition of bad. Reese groaned. I don't know what's worse, that you said that, or that I kinda expected you to. He stood and paced the small cockpit. He had two options. Ignore the message, wipe the ship's system, and pretend none of this ever happened. Actually listen to the message and get involved in something way above his pay grade. The obvious choice was option 1. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't some noble space explorer. He was just a mechanic who wanted a cheap way off his dirtball of a planet. And yet, something about the way the counselor's voice had trembled stuck with him. Nova, he said hesitantly. Who were the Zalari? A slight pause. Then, the Zalari were an advanced civilization that thrived approximately 200 years ago. They were known for their technology, particularly in the field of quantum energy manipulation. Reese frowned. Then what happened? They were exterminated by the Voidborn. The weight of the word settled over him. He had heard rumors about the Voidborn, stories whispered in the back alleys of space stations. They weren't a species. They weren't even a government. They were a force. A shadowy, unstoppable entity that erased entire civilizations without leaving a trace. No one knew why they did it. No one even knew what they were. All that was certain. If the Voidborn were after you, you were already dead. Reese exhaled slowly. And this survivor the message mentioned? Nova hesitated. Unknown. Reese stared at the screen. There was something wrong with this. If the Voidborn had destroyed the Zalari 200 years ago, why was the distress signal just now activating? As if on cue, Nova's systems flickered. An alert pulsed across the dashboard. Incoming signal detected. Reese tensed. What kind of signal? Nova's tone sharpened. Not friendly. On the ship's radar, a red blip appeared. Then another. And another. Reese swore under his breath. Tell me those aren't. They are. Nova's voice was calm, but Reese could hear the underlying urgency. 3 incoming vessels, she continued. Their markings match known bounty hunters associated with the Voidborn. Reese's blood ran cold. Damn it. He bolted to the pilot's seat. How the hell did they find me already? Nova's voice was smooth, almost amused. Perhaps because you turned on a ship carrying a distress beacon? Reese groaned. I hate this ship. Understandable. The first enemy ship fired. Reese barely had time to yank the controls before a laser blast tore through the air where the starborn eclipse had been. The ship's warning systems blared. He didn't hesitate. He slammed the throttle forward, and the starborn eclipse roared to life, shooting out of the scrapyard and into the sky. The chase was on. A fight for survival. Reese had been in plenty of ships before. But this? This was something else. The starborn eclipse handled too well, almost like it was reading his thoughts. It was fast, responsive, and had acceleration that should have ripped him apart. Unfortunately, the bounty hunters weren't slouches either. A sleek black fighter swooped in from the right, cannons glowing. Reese jerked the controls, barely dodging the incoming blast. Nova, tell me this ship has weapons. A brief pause. Affirmative. Reese gritted his teeth. Then maybe use them. A panel on the dashboard lit up. Two automated turrets unfolded from the ship's hull. Before Reese could even react, they fired a rapid burst of plasma bolts, striking the lead bounty hunter's ship. The enemy fighter spun out of control, colliding with an abandoned fuel station. A fiery explosion lit up the sky. Reese blinked. Whoa! Nova sounded almost smug. Target eliminated. The remaining two bounty hunters weren't deterred. They closed in, trying to box Reese in. Suggestions? He asked. Nova's response was instant. There is a nearby asteroid belt. Entering it will increase our chances of survival by 67%. Reese adjusted course. And the other 33%? Death. Great. Love those odds. The starborn Eclipse rocketed toward the asteroid belt. The massive chunks of rock loomed ahead, spinning dangerously. Behind him, the bounty hunters hesitated. Reese grinned. Not so brave now, are you? He dived between two asteroids, twisting the ship in ways it probably wasn't meant to be twisted. The bounty hunters followed, but they weren't as agile. One of them clipped a floating rock and spiraled out of control. Reese let out a breath. One left. The final bounty hunter stayed on his tail. Nova's voice was sharp. I detect an incoming missile lock. Reese's stomach twisted. Then he saw it, a blinking red light on his scanners. The bounty hunter had fired a tracking missile. And it was gaining fast. No, not today. Reese slammed the controls, weaving between asteroids. The missile adjusted course, relentless. He needed a plan. Fast. Then, he spotted it. A massive asteroid with a deep cavern running through it. Nova, what are the chances I can fly through that? Less than 5%. Reese grinned. I like those odds. He pushed the ship to max speed. The asteroid loomed ahead. The missile followed. At the last second, Reese pulled up, just slightly, guiding the starborn Eclipse through the cavern's narrow passage. The bounty hunter didn't make it. A fiery explosion lit up the asteroid belt as the ship and missile collided. Silence. Then. Nova's voice, calm as ever. Threat neutralized. Reese exhaled, hands shaking on the controls. I can't believe that worked. Nova hesitated. Neither can I. Reese chuckled breathlessly. See? We're learning to trust each other. An unexpected development. Reese grinned. But his smile quickly faded. Because despite his escape, one thing was clear. The Voidborn knew about the ship. And now, they knew about him. As he set course for the distress signal source, Reese had the sinking feeling that his life had just changed forever. And not in a good way. Escape into the unknown. Reese Carter had officially crossed into deep trouble territory. 1 minute, he was a struggling mechanic with a $10 spaceship. The next, he was dodging bounty hunters, flying through asteroid belts, and apparently carrying the last hope of a long-extinct alien race. And now? Now he was about to find out exactly who had sent that distress call. The starborn Eclipse cruised through the void, its engines humming softly. The ship had seen better days, half the systems flickered at random, and Nova, the ship's AI, had mentioned at least 12 critical failures. But somehow, it was still flying. And it was leading Reese straight into the unknown. Following the signal. Reese sat in the pilot's chair, scanning the empty void ahead. So, Nova, how much farther? The signal originates from a desolate moon on the edge of the Charon system, Nova replied. We will arrive in approximately 22 minutes. Reese drummed his fingers on the controls. And we're sure this isn't a trap? No, Nova said simply. Reese exhaled. Fantastic. He leaned back, letting his mind drift. The last few hours had been insane. He still wasn't sure what he had gotten himself into, but one thing was clear, this ship wasn't just some random junker. It was important. And people were willing to kill for it. That thought made his stomach twist. Before he could dwell on it, the ship's warning systems blared. Reese jolted upright. What now? Long-range scanners detecting multiple incoming ships, Nova said. Unknown signatures. They are approaching fast. Reese swore under his breath. More bounty hunters? Unlikely. Nova brought up the visual feed. A fleet of dark, jagged ships cut through space, moving in eerie unison. Their hulls were black, like they absorbed the light around them. Reese felt a chill run down his spine. What the hell are those? Nova's voice was uncharacteristically tense. Void-born vessels. Reese's pulse spiked. The Void-born had found him. A desperate escape. Reese slammed his hands on the controls. Nova, get us out of here. Calculating emergency jump coordinates. The Void-born ships accelerated. Red warning lights flashed across the dashboard as the starborn Eclipse powered up its hyperspace drive. The Void-born fired. A blast of dark energy streaked through space, barely missing the ship. The energy crackled, distorting the surrounding stars like a ripple through reality itself. Reese gritted his teeth. Not good. Not good. Another shot. This one struck the rear shields. The ship lurched, alarms blaring. Shields at 62%, Nova reported. Reese clenched his jaw. Nova, I need something fast. Jumping now would be highly unstable. Do it anyway. The Void-born fired again. And the starborn Eclipse vanished into hyperspace. A crash landing. The ship jerked violently as it exited hyperspace. Reese barely had time to react before the alarms screamed again. Warning, Nova said. Hyperspace exit was unstable. We are. The ship suddenly plunged. Reese's stomach flipped as the starborn Eclipse spiraled toward a barren, gray moon. He grabbed the controls, fighting against the pull of gravity. Nova, any chance of a soft landing? Unlikely. Reese swore and braced himself. The ship hit hard. The impact sent Reese flying forward. Sparks erupted from the control panel. Metal screeched as the ship skidded across the rocky surface. Then, silence. Dust settled. Reese groaned, prying himself out of the pilot's seat. His body ached, but he was alive. Nova, he muttered, rubbing his head. Status? The ship is heavily damaged, Nova replied. But still operational. Reese let out a breath. Small victories. He glanced out the cockpit window. The moon was desolate, covered in jagged rock formations and endless gray plains. And somewhere out there, the person who had sent the distress call was waiting. Reese grabbed his jacket and unholstered the small blaster he kept on his belt. Time to meet the last Zalari. Meeting the survivor. Reese stepped out of the ship, the ground crunching beneath his boots. A cold wind howled across the barren landscape. For a long moment, there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. She was tall, her skin a shimmering shade of deep violet. Her eyes glowed faintly, shifting between silver and blue. She wore a sleek, form-fitting suit, lined with glowing circuits. And in her hands, she held a long, curved blade. Reese raised his hands cautiously. Hey, you sent a distress signal? The woman studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, in a voice both soft and commanding, she spoke. You are not what I expected. Reese let out a nervous chuckle. Yeah, I get that a lot. She didn't smile. Instead, she took a slow step forward, tightening her grip on the blade. Who are you? She demanded. Reese exhaled. Name's Reese. Bought a ship for $10, and now I guess I'm part of a galactic conspiracy. The woman's eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, she lunged. Reese barely dodged as the blade slashed through the air. Whoa, whoa. I'm not the enemy. The woman moved impossibly fast. In a blink, she was behind him, pressing the blade against his throat. Prove it, she murmured. Reese swallowed hard. How? A pause. Then, before he could react, the woman reached into her suit and pulled out a small, glowing crystal. It pulsed with energy, vibrating slightly. She pressed it against his chest. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the crystal reacted. A surge of energy rushed through Reese, nearly knocking him off his feet. The woman's eyes widened in shock. It's true, she whispered. The ship chose you. Reese blinked. Wait. What? The woman stepped back, lowering her weapon. My name is Lyra, she said finally. I am the last of the Zalari. Reese let out a slow breath. Nice to meet you, Lyra. Now, what the hell did you just do to me? She hesitated. The artifact you carry, it reacts only to those meant to wield it. Reese frowned. Artifact? She nodded. The Starborn Eclipse is more than a ship. It is a vault. A guardian of something the Voidborn have hunted for centuries. Reese's pulse quickened. And what, exactly, is inside it? Lyra's expression turned grim. The only thing in existence that can kill the Voidborn. Silence stretched between them. Reese exhaled. Great. So now they really want me dead. Lyra nodded. Which means we must leave. Now. Reese sighed. Yeah. That's what I was afraid of. Above them, in the distant sky, dark shapes began to appear. The Voidborn had followed. And they were coming. A battle for survival. Reese Carter had been in bad situations before. But standing on a desolate moon with an extinct alien survivor, while a fleet of Voidborn ships descended from the sky, was a whole new level of bad. His mind raced. Escape. They needed an escape. The Starborn Eclipse was barely holding together after the crash landing. And Lyra, who had just revealed herself as the last of the Zalari, had a weapon but no ship. Meanwhile, the Voidborn had 3 heavily armed warships and whatever nightmare fuel they kept inside them. This was not looking great. Reese glanced at Lyra. Do you have a plan? Lyra didn't hesitate. We fight. Reese let out a short, nervous laugh. That's a terrible plan. She turned to him, her silver blue eyes steady. Do you have a better one? Reese opened his mouth. Closed it. Not yet. Above them, the Voidborn ships broke through the moon's thin atmosphere. And the attack began. Facing the enemy. The first explosion shook the ground. Reese barely kept his footing as a plasma blast struck the rocky terrain nearby, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. Lyra moved fast. 1 second she was beside him, the next, she had already sprinted forward, her blade humming with energy. Reese had no idea what she planned to do against warships, but she looked confident. And then he saw why. The ships hadn't just come to bomb them. They had deployed ground troops. Dozens of figures in sleek, shadowy armor dropped from the ships, landing in perfect formation. Their helmets were smooth and featureless, glowing faintly with eerie red symbols. Reese's stomach turned. Voidborn foot soldiers. He had never seen one up close before. No one had. People who encountered the Voidborn didn't live to talk about it. Yet here they were, marching toward him with precision, weapons drawn. Reese gripped his blaster. Okay. Now I really need a plan. Lyra didn't wait. She vanished in a blur of motion, too fast for Reese to follow, and suddenly, the first Void-born soldier collapsed, its armor sparking. The others barely reacted. They simply turned in unison, weapons raised. And opened fire. Reese dove behind a boulder as plasma bolts streaked past him. His heart pounded. Nova, tell me the ship has something left in it. Nova's voice crackled through his earpiece. Primary weapons are offline. Hull integrity at 47%. Defensive systems. Just tell me if we have guns. Reese interrupted. A pause. Then. Affirmative. The ship's remaining turrets activated with a whir. The ground trembled as two cannons extended from the sides of the starborn Eclipse, auto-targeting the Void-born troops. Then they fired. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Explosions tore through the enemy ranks. Lyra moved like lightning, weaving between the soldiers, cutting them down one by one. And Reese? He did the only thing he could do. He fought like hell. Holding the line. Reese wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a great shot. But survival was a powerful motivator. He ducked from cover to cover, firing off quick bursts with his blaster. A Void-born soldier dropped, then another. But for every one they took down, two more seemed to take its place. This is not sustainable, he shouted, reloading frantically. Lyra didn't respond. She was too busy destroying everything in her path. Reese had never seen anyone fight like that. She moved with precision, dodging plasma fire, slicing through armor like it was nothing. But even she was being pushed back. The Void-born were relentless. Reese glanced up at the sky, and his stomach dropped. The warships were repositioning. They're gonna bomb us again. Nova's voice cut in. Incoming orbital strike detected. Reese clenched his jaw. They had maybe 2 minutes before the Void-born wiped this whole area off the map. And their only way out was sitting half-broken behind him. He gritted his teeth. Nova, bring the ship's engines online. We need to go. Engines at 23% functionality, Nova responded. Liftoff is inadvisable. Reese swore. I didn't ask if it was advisable, just possible. A pause. Then, possible. Good enough for me. He turned to Lyra. We need to get to the ship. Now. Lyra parried an incoming strike, her blade slicing clean through a Void-born soldier's weapon. We cannot leave them alive. Reese groaned. I love that you're a warrior and all, but we're about to be vaporized. Priorities. She hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. Together, they sprinted for the ship. The escape. The starborn Eclipse was in rough shape. Panels were missing. Wires sparked. The hull was covered in scorch marks. But when Reese slammed into the pilot's seat and yanked the controls, it moved. The ship groaned in protest as it lifted off the ground, shaking violently. Outside, the Void-born regrouped, firing wildly at the rising vessel. Shields at 18%, Nova reported. Reese gritted his teeth. Just get us into space. The ship climbed higher, higher. Then the Void-born warships fired. A streak of black energy tore through the sky, heading straight for them. Reese barely had time to react before the blast hit. For a brief, terrifying moment, everything went dark. Then the ship jerked violently, alarms screaming. Reese gasped as light flooded back into the cockpit. His hands scrambled over the controls. Nova? What the hell just happened? Direct hit, Nova said calmly. Hull integrity at. The ship lurched again. Reese cursed. Lyra, Tell me you have some idea how to get us out of this. Lyra's voice was steady. I do. Rhys turned, and his stomach dropped. She had the Zalari artifact in her hands. The same one that had reacted to Rhys earlier. And it was glowing. Rhys' eyes widened. Wait, what are you doing? She met his gaze. Saving us. Before he could stop her, she pressed the artifact against the ship's console. A pulse of energy exploded outward. The ship's systems surged to life. Nova's voice crackled. Unknown power source detected. Energy levels rising. The ship moved. No, not moved, jumped. 1 second, they were surrounded by void-born ships. The next. They were somewhere else. Silence. Rhys gasped for breath, staring at the empty void outside. No warships. No soldiers. They were gone. What the hell just happened? Lyra let out a slow breath. We survived. Rhys turned to her, heart still pounding. No, seriously, what did you do? She held up the artifact. It flickered weakly, its glow fading. The ship is not just a vessel, she murmured. It is a weapon. And now, it has awakened. Rhys leaned back, exhaling sharply. Fantastic. So now we have a magic warship and the Voidborn hunting us. Lyra met his gaze. Yes. Rhys groaned. I hate my life. But deep down, he knew there was no going back. This wasn't just about him anymore. The Voidborn had wiped out the Zalari once. Now, they were coming to finish the job. And if Rhys wanted to stay alive, he had to be ready. The final stand. Rhys Carter never asked for any of this. He never wanted a war. Never wanted to be hunted across the galaxy. All he wanted was a spaceship, something cheap, something his own. But now? Now he was sitting in the cockpit of an ancient Zalari warship, holding an artifact that pulsed with raw energy, while the most feared force in the universe was closing in. The Voidborn weren't just after him anymore. They were coming to end everything. And for the first time in his life, Rhys knew there was no running away. This time, he had to fight. Preparing for war. The starborn eclipse had jumped them somewhere, but Nova was still recalibrating the navigation system. Rhys leaned forward, rubbing his temples. Nova, where the hell are we? Unknown system, Nova replied. But we are not alone. Rhys frowned. Not alone? Nova brought up the external scanners. Outside, a massive space station hovered in the distance. It looked ancient, its metal hull scarred from countless battles. Faint energy shields flickered around it, barely holding together. And in the center, a fleet of ships. Not void-born. But not friendly-looking either. Lyra narrowed her eyes. I know this place. Rhys turned to her. Good no, or bad no? She hesitated. It is called Vorax Refuge. A station for outlaws. Smugglers. Mercenaries. Rhys exhaled. Great. Exactly the kind of people we need. Lyra raised an eyebrow. You wish to recruit them? Rhys grinned. Oh, absolutely. If we're gonna take on the Voidborn, we need all the firepower we can get. The unlikely alliance. Docking at Vorax Refuge was risky. The station's security systems immediately scanned the starborn eclipse the moment they arrived, and within minutes, Rhys and Lyra were surrounded by heavily armed mercenaries. A massive, battle-scarred alien stepped forward. His armor was patched together from different suits, and his tusks curled slightly over his lower lip. He crossed his arms. That ship of yours is trouble. Rhys smiled nervously. Yeah, I get that a lot. The alien narrowed his eyes. Give me one reason why I shouldn't sell you to the Voidborn myself. Lyra's hand tightened on her blade. Rhys raised his hands. Because if you do, you'll be dead in less than a week. Silence. The mercenaries shifted. Some looked amused. Others, concerned. Rhys pressed on. The Voidborn are coming. Not just for us. For everyone. You think they'll stop with me? With this ship? He pointed to the fleet outside. They'll wipe you all out. Every last one of you. The alien studied him. Then, he laughed. A deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the docking bay. Brave words, he said. But we are not fools. Rhys clenched his jaw. I'm not asking you to die for me. I'm asking you to fight for yourselves. The alien considered this. Then he turned to his crew. What say you? The mercenaries exchanged glances. Some murmured. Then, one by one, they nodded. The alien grinned. Fine. We'll fight. Rhys exhaled. Now, they had an army. The Voidborn arrive. It didn't take long. The Voidborn found them. One moment, the station was quiet. The next, alarms screamed. Rhys sprinted to the command deck, Lyra right behind him. Nova's voice crackled through the comms. Multiple Voidborn vessels inbound. Estimated arrival, 3 minutes. Rhys clenched his fists. All right. Let's do this. Outside, the mercenary fleet powered up. Weapons glowed. Shields flared. And as the Voidborn ships dropped from hyperspace, the battle began. The last fight. The station shook as the first wave of attacks hit. Explosions lit up the void. Rhys gripped the controls of the starborn Eclipse, weaving between enemy fire. Nova, give me something good. Activating primary weapons. The ship's dormant systems roared to life. And for the first time, Rhys understood. This wasn't just a ship. It was a war machine. Cannons charged. Energy rippled across its surface. And when Rhys fired, the Voidborn burned. The final stand. The battle raged. Ships exploded. The mercenary fleet held their ground, but the Voidborn kept coming. Rhys' hands were slick with sweat. We can't hold them off forever. Lyra grabbed his arm. We don't need to. She held up the artifact. And suddenly, Rhys knew what to do. He took a deep breath, focusing. Letting the ship's power flow through him. The starborn Eclipse glowed. A massive pulse of energy erupted from the ship. And the Voidborn screamed. Their ships disintegrated. The darkness broke. And then, it was over. Aftermath. Silence. The Voidborn fleet was gone. The mercenaries cheered. The station held. Rhys slumped back in his chair, breathing hard. Lyra sat beside him. It is done. Rhys let out a weak laugh. Yeah. Somehow. She looked at him. You did well. He grinned. You too. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly. The war wasn't over. But today? They had won. And for the first time, Rhys knew he had found his place among them. The end.